evening, students. I hope all of you are doing good and I hope your preparation is going fine. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 24th of February 2024 and we are here to discuss important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, the handout of the session is there in the description box. You may utilize it to streamline your current affairs preparation. Now, coming on to the table of contents. The first topic for today is World Trade Organization and Overview. The second topic is in relation to the grey zone warfare. Third topic is in relation to the changing growth paradigm. And fourth topic is in relation to PM Ujjwala Yojana. And last but not the least is related to the Surrogacy Rules Amendment. Now coming on to the first topic. So coming on to the first topic, that is World Trade Organization and Overview. Now, why this is in news? Because the ministers across the globe are convening for a WTO meeting in Abu Dhabi early next week. So, in relation to that, it is very important for us to understand what is this World Trade Organization, what is its mandate, why it came into existence, what are the peculiar features of it, and all the other necessary details. Now, in relation to General Studies Paper 2, important international institutions, this WTO becomes very, very important. Now, directly jumping onto the topic, first of all, what is this World Trade Organization? So, we all know that it is an intergovernmental organization with the main aim of regulation of international trade. So, regulating international trade is the main aim and objective of this World Trade Organization, as the name is also suggesting. It was established in the year 1995. Now, before 1995 also, there was an arrangement which used to regulate the world trade. That arrangement was in the form of a GATT, that is General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. Now, as the name is suggesting, it was not an institution but an agreement. So, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, after the agreement, there was an institution which was set up, that is your World Trade Organization, which was happening in the year 1995. Now, this World Trade Organization, it is having 164 member states, which represents close to 98% of the global trade and the GDP. Now, what is very important for us to understand is what were the loopholes existing in General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, because of which there was a need to move towards this WTO. So, first of all, let us understand the loopholes consisting of your GATT. So, first problem with GATT was that it was just an agreement and it was not having an institutional structure. So, there was lack of institutional structure. Second was limited coverage of services. So, one very prominent feature of GATT was that it only dealt with trade in goods. It excluded the trade in services. That is one loophole with GATT. Also, limited coverage of intellectual property rights. For example, copyrights, patents, trademarks. General Agreement on Trade and Tariff did not discuss about intellectual property rights. So, the coverage of IPR, intellectual property right, was limited in GATT. That was also one point of problem. And a dispute resolution mechanism was not existent. So there was absence of a strong dispute redressal mechanism in GATT. So these were the loopholes because of which a need was felt that we need to move towards a larger institution that would then become your World Trade Organization, that is WTO. Now coming on to the structure, governing structure of WTO. After that, we'll be understanding the functioning of WTO as well. But first, let us understand the governing structure of WTO. So, highest body under WTO is your ministerial conference, right? And under ministerial conference, there is a general council which is responsible for the day-to-day functioning of the WTO. Now, alongside this general council, there is also a council for trade policy review, right? So, trade review policy of the entire world, especially the member states, the reviewing their trade policies, that is the purpose of this council. Now, also there is a council on a dispute settlement body, right, for settlement of trade disputes between the country. So these are important. Ministerial conference is very important. Then under ministerial conference, there is your general council. Alongside general council, there is trade policy review body. And there is dispute settlement body. Two bodies, trade policy review body and dispute settlement body. Now, under that, there are a lot of sub-councils, which tells us the different arenas under which WTO is working. For example, there is Council for Trade in Goods, which is especially your GATT itself, because GATT dealt in goods, trade in goods. Then there is Council for Trade in Intellectual Property Rights, which was not existent in GATT, but it is included in the WTO, right? Then Council for Trade in Services, again, this was not there in the GATT, but is there in the WTO. And also Trade Negotiations Committee, right? So all these committees are a part of the General Council under the General Council. So three layers are very important. That is your ministerial conference, under that your general councils, and different levels of committees under the General Council. And other than General Council, your Trade Policy Review Body and also your Dispute Settlement Body, they are very, very important if you have to understand the governing structure of World Trade Organization. Now, moving forward, we need to understand what are the various peculiar functions performed by the WTO. So first function, a very important function, is to administer the World Trade Organization trade agreements. So WTO trade agreements amongst the different countries, to administer that is the primary function of WTO. Also to provide a forum, to act as a platform, to act as a forum for negotiations amongst its members in relation to international trade. So WTO provides a platform, a forum. It is also a mechanism for settling trade disputes between the members. So when GATT was existent, there was no mechanism for settlement of trade disputes. But WTO's main aim is that trade disputes should be settled in an amicable way, right? So first is administering WTO trade agreements, then becoming a forum for a negotiation amongst the members, then mechanism for settlement of trade disputes. Also, it provides technical assistance and training for developing and underdeveloped countries, right? Also, it cooperates with other international organizations, which includes your International Monetary Fund, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and World Bank, and so on, and the other affiliated agencies. So international cooperation, that is also one of the very good function of World Trade Organization. Now, what is very important for us to understand is the principles of a World Trade Organization. So first, a very important principle is the principle of non-discrimination. That is, WTO is having a most favored nation rule. Now, most favored nation rule requires equal treatment for all the trade partners. That means you can't discriminate amongst the trade partners. You need to provide every member country with the most favored nation tag. So all the member countries of the WTO, they need to provide each other with the MFN tag, most favored nation tag, and they should not discriminate against the members based on different criteria. But of course, there are certain exceptions to it. Some security related exceptions are there. Some free trade agreement related exceptions are there. But generally, the principle is the principle of non-discrimination. You should not discriminate amongst the trade members. That is the first principle. Second is national treatment policy. Now, this national treatment policy says that as soon as a foreign country's product enters to your market or enters in your country, remember, I'm saying after entering to the country. So once a foreign product enters to our domestic market, it should be treated the same as with the domestic goods. So same as the domestic goods, the treatment of that foreign good should be. Does that mean we can't levy import duty on them? The answer is no. You can levy import duty on the products, but once import duty is levied, right? Once those products enter into the market, after that you can't discriminate against those products vis-a-vis your domestic goods. So domestic goods and foreign goods to be treated equally once foreign goods enter into the domestic market. So national treatment policy is also there. Then there is principle of reciprocity, right? That means you need to reciprocate in relation to the trade agreements. It aims to limit the free riding and obtain better access to the foreign markets, so that if a particular country is giving some benefits to other trading partner, reciprocity should be there. They need to revert back in the same way, right? Now, binding and enforceable commitments. So this is very important, that the tariff commitments which are listed under the WTO, they are listed in a legal instrument which we call as Schedule of Concessions. and they are binding and enforceable on the WTO members. Very, very important. Also, in relation to transparency, there is a principle that all the member countries must publish the trade and regulations which they're having, that is, their national trade regulations, and should notify any changes made to them to the WTO. So there should be utmost transparency in all the trade regulations of each individual member country. That is also very, very important principle of WTO. Then trade policy review mechanism. So there is trade policy review also. Trade policy of every member country. So every member's trade policy would be reviewed by the trade policy review body. It would be reviewed. It facilitates periodic country specific trade policy review to make sure that are the countries complying to the WTO standards or not. Again, a very, very important thing in relation to the WTO. I hope World Trade Organization is very clear to all of you and the functioning is very clear to all of you. Now, various agreements under the WTO, that is for some other session to take, right? We will take it out in some other session if it is there in the news. But for now, WTO's overview, I guess it should be very, very clear. Now, moving on to the gray zone warfare. Again, a very important topic. So our CDS recently has said that gray zone warfare is the latest entry in the lexicon of warfare. In relation to General Studies Paper 3, Security of our Nation, this gray zone warfare becomes very, very important. And little bit in relation to your General Studies Paper 2, International Relations also, you can associate this gray zone warfare. Now, first thing which comes into our mind is, what is this gray zone warfare? So, if I have to give you a very simple definition, gray zone warfare is a strategy where a country tries to gain advantage over the other country without resorting to an open war. So, kind of a cold war. That means you are not being in a situation which is white, that is total peace, or you are not being in utmost war also, outright war also, that is, you are not in a situation of black as well, but you are somewhere in the between, that is your gray area. So gray zone warfare. Now we'll be understanding this through the help of this diagram and paradigm. Let us see what is this diagram all about. So first of all, the line which you see over here, it is the level of force. It reflects the level of force. So this green portion, it reflects the non-violent forces. That means there is no violence. This red reflects the violent part, right? So non-violence and violence. And what are the vectors reflecting? This vector reflects the military. That means non-violence where military is involved, violence where military is involved, and this reflects your civil. That means non-violence where civilians are involved and violence where again civilians are involved, right? So let us see one by one, right? So if you are talking about non-violence, right, that means there is no violence and military is taking a charge, that means we are talking about diplomacy. The tools which are used are diplomacy. And if we little bit move towards from non-violence towards violence, we get information operations. Now let us move over here. If we are violent, if a country is using a violent strategy and military is involved, right, then interstate war would be there. Outright war, for example, Russia-Ukraine war, right? And a little bit below that, right, if you are not going for an outright war, there would be peacekeeping operations in which military would be involved. Of course, there would be certain element of violence involved. Now let us move towards the paradigm of civil. Right? Now, civil associated with non-violent. So there will be a free market. That means trade and commerce would be happening freely. So non-violence is there. Cooperation is there by people to people. So free market is there. Right? And let us move over here. That is violent and civil. So there will be a lot of violence which will be conducted by the civilian population. Of course, there are not a lot of examples where civilians are involved in violent processes from country to country, right? So inter-country operations, interstate operations, violence and civil operations examples are not much. But our focus is at the paradigm which is existing over here. That is the paradigm which is not white, not black, but grey. And it involves what? Your involvement of paramilitary forces, civil government organizations, state-owned enterprises, organized crimes, political assassinations, all those things which are not resorting to an outright war but are also not very peaceful. So that means countries are trying to gain an advantage over the other country without resorting to open war, but having some ways or some measures which are there in the gray category, that is neither black nor white. That is what we call as gray zone warfare. Now, again, in order to understand it even more, let us understand it in relation to the gray zone conflict characteristics. What are the characteristics of this gray zone warfare? First characteristic is that it is a tactical, operational, and strategic operation, right? So, this warfare is involving tactical, operational, and strategic processes. Also, it is utilized alongside non conventional operations. Conventional operations means outright war. Non conventional operations, gray zone warfare is associated with that. Now, it may be utilized standalone, that means separately gray zone warfare, or it may be used alongside conventional operations. That means there might be a war going on, and alongside there would be a gray zone warfare also going on. So both ways it works. Now coming to the protracted engagement. So it is one of the dominant characteristic of this gray zone warfare. And coming on to the global and regional revisionist ambitions. It is also one of the dominant characteristics of this gray zone warfare. Now coming on to the symmetry between opponents. That are the opponents at parity? Is there symmetry? So they can be utilized both in symmetric operations and asymmetric conditions. Symmetric means when both the parties, both the countries which are in warfare, they are equals, right? Asymmetric means they are not equals. So symmetric means your US and Russia. Asymmetric means US and let's say a very, very small country like Rwanda, Uganda, right? So that is asymmetric. So this gray zone warfare can be utilized in both the conditions. Now let us understand this gray zone warfare with the help of certain examples. So Chinese gray zone campaign, it involved a lot of things. First was narrative wars. So you're not resorting outright war, that is with guns, ammunition, tanks. You're not resorting to that, but you're resorting to a narrative warfare. That is a gray zone warfare. It involves using propaganda, using information operations and history to establish a intended story which will help your country. That is a narrative warfare. Then it can be denial of prosperity through various sanctions, through various manipulations of capital, energy markets, so the debt trap diplomacy, right? It can be a tool used in this denial of prosperity. Then cyber operations, trade policy designed to undermine the economic prospects of some other country. So no outright war is taking place, but the warfare is in gray zone, which is with the example of this Chinese gray zone warfare. Also civilian interventions. For example, sending civil agencies or groups to occupy or stake claims or establish facts on the ground. So using NGOs, using civil societies, right, in order to establish certain facts which will be harmful for the other country, right? This is also a gray zone warfare. In relation to Russia, let us see some examples. For example, active infiltration, which can include intelligence services, cyber intrusions, right? Cyber warfare or information operations, which will help in encroaching the territory, challenge sovereignty, and conduct the attacks on some other countries. That is a part of Russia's gray zone campaign. Then coercive signaling. For example, moving military from one place to another. So you are signaling to the other country in a coercive way, right? Military exercises or nuclear threats to intimidate the other parties. For example, Iran is involved in that. Sometimes North Korea you can see being involved in that. That is your gray zone warfare. Then proxy disruption also. Proxy disruption means it involves usage of proxy forces, for example, guerrilla warfare, to undermine a stability in the region. So all these examples which we saw, they're not examples of outright war or conventional warfare, but they're examples of unconventional warfare which is involved in the gray zone warfare. I hope this is very clear again to all of you. Now let us understand the various tools, and now we'll be able to understand this gray zone warfare in an even clearer manner. We will see the different gray zone techniques. What are the different techniques used? While understanding the techniques, we'll be understanding the detail of it, why that technique is deployed, the purpose of it, and what are the examples existing of those techniques being deployed. So there are especially four techniques which I want to discuss with all of you. First is information warfare. We have discussed about it in the previous slide also, but let us discuss about it in a bit length of detail. Then economic pressure. This is also one form of gray zone warfare. Then material support to sub-state entities. Now this is happening in India's case also, where proxy war is happening. Then gradualism, right? So all these four gray zone techniques will be understanding one by one. First, information warfare. All of you must be aware of it, even to a very small extent, but you would be aware of it. That is dissemination of misleading information, creating a propaganda, false propaganda, to appeal to the diaspora and ethnic ties. So now what is the purpose of it? The purpose is to erode the political peace and unity of the country. So if one country is leading or is making towards this information warfare to another country, they are basically disseminating misleading information, involved in false propaganda, and appealing to the diaspora and ethnic ties. What is the purpose? Purpose is to erode the political stability, political peace, and unity within the opponent's domestic political environment. So this was used in Russia and Ukraine's media. This could be seen false information or misleading informations. Then economic pressure. So state level economic sanctions and blackmail. For example, US uses it against Russia. Economic sanctions and blackmail, which is in the cases of asymmetric economic interdependence. Now, what is the main purpose? To erode the opponent's key economic sectors, right? So it can be seen in sanction regimes between Russia and the West. So Europe's sanction to Russia or US sanctions to Russia. Then material support to sub-state entities. So material and political support for rebels in the opponent country. So rebels and local elites through supply of war materials. For example, if someone wants to have a gray zone warfare against India, they can provide warfare, they can provide the materials, ammunitions, guns and arms to the Naxalites, right? And Naxalites can wage war against the country, right? So material support to the sub-state entities. Other countries not involved in a direct war with our country, but it is a gray zone warfare, right? So what's the main aim of this? Main aim is states desire to insulate themselves from responsibility domestically and internationally, right? So states would desire to insulate themselves, and there will be insulation from the war casualties, and it would be leading to one country becoming very, very weak, right? Because of support being given to the rebels and the local elites in that country, right? So, for example, Russia's material support for the rebels in the Luhansk and Donetsk region of Ukraine, and Ukrainian support for the volunteer battalions in Russia, right? So both are examples of this material support to the sub-state entities. Now this gradualism. So states utilize hybrid warfare in gradualism, right? Hybrid warfare techniques in gradual manner with the short-term tactical objectives. So gradual, in a slow way, hybrid warfare techniques are deployed, right? With the short-term tactical objective being relatively overt, not covert, being relatively overt, right? Very, very important. What is the purpose of it? The purpose is to make a final point of victory in the conflict by all parties, ambiguous for the opponent. And the main purpose is revision of order of alliance and international norms, where one party is declaring victory against the other party. One country is declaring victory against the other country. They would go for gradualism. That is hybrid warfare activities. So, for example, use of cyberspace by Russia to erode the integrity of a military and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. To just show that Russia is having a dominant power over Ukraine, and to show that Russia is having a victory over Ukraine, right? That is why this gradualism gray zone technique is deployed. I hope by now you would know what is gray zone warfare, what are the different components of this gray zone warfare, what it entails, what are the several examples which we see around the world, especially in relation to West, China, Russia, and Ukraine, how this gray zone warfare is interplaying. I hope this is very, very clear. Now, moving on to the third topic of today, that is you're changing the growth paradigm. Now, a write-up has appeared on GDP not being an accurate measure of nation's well-being. So in relation to that, this topic becomes very important, that is GDP an accurate measure for nation's well-being or not? And how the growth paradigm has been changing. So in relation to General Studies Paper 3, Indian Economy and Inclusive Growth, this topic becomes very, very important. So first, we are talking about GDP. So our topic is changing the growth paradigm. Now, what is this growth paradigm? That means the components which reflects growth of a country. And the biggest component which comes into our mind whenever we talk about growth of a country, we talk about economic growth. And while we are talking about economic growth, we talk about growth in the GDP numbers. So first question in front of us is, what is this GDP? Now, full form you all would be knowing. It is gross domestic product. But what is this gross domestic product? So it is the gross value, of final goods and services, being produced within the domestic territory of a country, right, in a financial year. This is your gross domestic product. So what it includes? It includes final goods and services being produced in the domestic territory. Now, according to several experts, does the final goods and services production reflects well-being of a nation, right? Majority of the experts say no. Majority of the experts say there are a lot of loopholes associated in this GDP. GDP being a indicator for the welfare of the nation, because GDP just tells us the production. But there are other indicators for measuring nation's welfare. So first we need to understand what is lacking in the GDP. So is GDP telling us about the distribution of GDP? That are the rich contributing more to the GDP or the poor? Is it telling us anything about the distribution? The answer is no, right? Is it reflecting the level of inequality existent? That means just 10% of the population is having access to more than 50% of the resources. Is GDP telling us this the inequality? The answer is no. Is GDP telling anything about the composition between the rich and poor? Again, the answer would be no. Is GDP telling us the non-monetary exchanges, that is the barter system exchanges? Again, the answer is no. Is GDP taking into account any of the externalities, for example, environmental challenges, right? Greenhouse gases being emitted, or global warming? Is GDP telling us anything about that? Again, the answer is no. And is GDP telling us anything about happiness and well-being of the nation? Again, the answer is a big, big no. So that means GDP is not giving us information about these things. So GDP focuses only on the size of the economy, right? It doesn't look at what are the harms or benefits of the people and the planet, right? It reflects the size, but it does not reflect the distribution and inequality. It does not reflect impact of economic activity on well-being and social prosperity. And also it does not tell us about the environmental impact as well, right? So decisions about the economy should be guided by a metric that looks at the whole picture, right? And measures what matters the most, that is the well-being. So we need to find a new measure which gives us the whole side of the story, whole picture, right? Rather than just giving us one side of the story, that is the size of the economy, that is the production. All of other things also mentioned here we need to know, right? So now the question is, what is GDP not including, right? So GDP includes consumption, GDP includes investment, GDP includes government expenditure and net exports also. What GDP does not include is economic outcomes. GDP does not give any indication about the wealth. It does not give any indication about employment. It does not give indication about non-market activity and insecurity. It does not tell us about living conditions also. GDP is not telling us about the education levels, environment levels, health levels, leisure levels, safety levels, and housing levels. It is also not giving us any indication about the well-being, that is the subjective well-being, relationships, community, civic engagement, equality, and civil rights. So all the things which are mentioned in the three bubbles and in the three circles, GDP is not telling us about. Only in this brown circle, GDP gives us a information, right? Which means there should be a alternative approach towards calculation of any measure which reflects or which goes beyond GDP. So what are the measures? First measure can be your Human Development Index. What it measures, it focuses on people and capabilities. And what are the criteria used? Health, education, and standard of living. So Human Development Index can be one step beyond GDP, which gives us more accurate measure of a nation's well-being. Then Better Life Index can be an alternative, which tells us about people's well-being. So material living conditions and quality of life it tells us about, right? Then there can be genuine progress indicator also. It does a cost benefit trade off of economic growth. It does an analysis on the same. And what are the categories? The categories are economic, environment, and social. So this is going beyond the GDP. And one more metric is there, gross national happiness. Now, gross national happiness tells us about living standards, about the psychological well being of the nation, healthcare, time use, education, cultural diversity and resilience, level of governance, that is good governance, community vitality, ecological diversity and resilience, that is environment consideration as well. So that is your gross national happiness. And which country follows this gross national happiness? The answer is Bhutan, right? So this tells us that the growth paradigm is changing, is evolving, and it needs to evolve beyond GDP being a metric, right? I hope this topic is again very, very clear to all of you. Now, second last topic, that is PM Ujjwala Yojana. Now, again, a write-up has appeared on making LPG subsidy more targeted and upfront refill subsidy, right? Now, in relation to general studies paper to welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections, this PM Ujjwala Yojana becomes very, very important. Now, this PM Ujjwala Yojana, let us know some key facts and figures about it. And you may read the write-up also, it is quite well written. You can read the write-up also and see this PM Ujjwala Yojana, basic key details also. So it was launched by our Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister Modi, on 1st of May 2016. What is the slogan? Slogan is clean fuel for a better life. So clean fuel, better life. And what are the objectives of this Ujjwala Yojana? Safeguarding women and children's health, that is the first objective. Then providing clean cooking fuel in the form of LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, so that it won't compromise the health of women in the smoky kitchens, and women should not wander in the unsafe areas for collection of firewood. These are the main aims and objectives of this Ujjwala Yojana. What is the implementing agency? It is Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. What is the budget? The budget is close to 8,000 crores. Now, what are the peculiar features of it? Peculiar features are, first is 5 crore LPG connections to the below poverty line families in the 3 years from 2016 to 19, and also providing support for 1600 rupees per connection in the next 3 years from 2016 to 19. Now, 2018, there was a revision made, and the target was now 8 crore LPG connections. And those LPG connections will be issued in the name of women of the household. This is a very important fact for your prelims. You should be knowing it, right? Now, coming to the eligibility and identification. So, all the below poverty line families are eligible for this. Any adult woman from the below poverty line family can apply for a deposit-free LPG gas connection under the PM Ujjwala Yojana. Now, it was again expanded in 2018, and other women beneficiaries from 7 more categories were added. That is your scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, those who are taking the benefit of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, those who are taking the benefit of Antyodaya Anna Yojana, or women from the most backward classes, or from tea gardens, forest dwellers, and river islands. These categories were added in 2018. Again, some factual parts which you should know. But how will the identification of this below poverty line family will take place? It will be taking place through the socio-economic caste census data of 2011. Now, this infographic over here, it also tells us about the LPG connections. So, active domestic LPG consumers are close to 31.4 crore total active consumers. Amongst them, 9.6 crores are Ujjwala beneficiaries, 21.8 crores are the other beneficiaries. Right. Now, annual cylinder consumption in the financial year 2023 was close to 180 crores in total. And under the Ujjwala, it is 35.6 crores, which is a very, very huge number. Certain data sets you need to know. No need to remember all the data sets. Okay. Now, coming on to the last topic of today, that is Surrogacy Rules Amendment. Again, a very important topic. Now, recently, the central government has modified the Surrogacy Regulation Rules 2022. And they have notified that both gametes need not come from the married couple, which was earlier the case, right? Under the Surrogacy Act. Both gametes need not come from the married couple in case they are suffering from a medical condition, right? We'll be studying about this amendment as a whole. In relation to general studies, paper 2, welfare schemes, it is very important. And in relation to issues relating to development of social sector, particularly healthcare, this is very, very important. Now, first we need to understand what is this surrogacy, right? Now, surrogacy is a method of reproduction whereby there is one woman who is known as surrogate. They carry the pregnancy and they give birth to a child, or they give birth with the intent to give that child to a contracted couple or party. So let's say there is a couple, and due to some reason, though that couple, let's say XY couple is there, they are not able to conceive a child, right? So they will take help of another carrier, that will be a surrogate, another woman who will carry the child in her womb and give birth to a child. The child would be the contracted couples and parties child, but surrogate mother would be helping in getting the child or giving the birth to that child, right? Now, I hope this surrogacy is clear to you. Now, surrogacy is a form of assisted reproductive technology. That means beyond your normal reproductive technologies, that is normal reproduction which takes place between male and female, if that does not work, there are other reproductive technologies which are, first, very, very prominent one is surrogacy, right? And a lot of examples in the world, a lot of celebrities, you can see this surrogacy examples, that their child has been born out of surrogacy, right? Now, Surrogacy Act, it allows only married infertile couples and certain categories of women to avail this particular facility. So certain other categories of women, for example, your widowed women, so they can avail the benefit. But one more thing is there, that is sale of gametes and any payment to the surrogate mother other than the insurance coverage and medical expenses have been prohibited under the act, right? Also, the clinics and banks which are offering this assisted reproductive technology, they have to be registered, right? And couple only becomes eligible for surrogacy. That means some other woman can carry their baby in the womb and give birth to the baby, that is the contracted party's baby, if they have been married for 5 years. And the wife is between 25 to 50 years and the husband is between 25 to 55 years, right? And also one more condition is there, that the couple must not be having any living child, but either biological, adopted or surrogate. That is one condition. Now, that condition is exempted if the child is mentally or physically disabled or suffering from any life-threatening disease or disorder, right? So they have been exempted from the above criterion. Now, I hope the surrogacy and law related to it is very clear to you. Now, let us come to the amendment, right? So, in March 14, right, what happened last year was the Rule 7 of Surrogacy Regulation Act, it said that couple who are wanting to undergo surrogacy, right, they must use their own eggs and sperms, right? So in female's case, it is the eggs, in male case, it is the sperms. So they must use their own eggs and sperms if they want a surrogate mother to give birth to their baby. Donor sperms or eggs are not allowed. That means no one can donate eggs and sperms in case of surrogacy. That is what Surrogacy Regulation Act said, right? Now, there were a lot of cases going on in the Supreme Court challenging this particular act. And recently what has happened is that the central government has amended the rules and they have notified that now the couple can use donor gametes. Earlier it was prohibited. Last year under the act, donor gametes, gametes means eggs and sperms, right? Donor sperms were not allowed previously. But now central government has amended the rules and they have said donor gametes, after the direct medical board has certified either spouse has a condition preventing use of own gamete, then the donor gametes can be allowed, right? So donor gametes are now allowed under the surrogacy rules, right? This is what the new rules amendment says. Just very simple thing. Earlier, donor gametes were not allowed to be used under surrogacy. Now the donor gametes are allowed in one condition. if any of the spouse or a spouse, any of the groom or the bride are having a medical condition which disallows them to either give their egg or sperm, right? In that case, they can have a donor who can give their egg or a sperm, right? But single women, they must use their own eggs, right? That is also one condition which is given over here. I hope the surrogacy rules amendment again is very, very clear to all of you. So all the very best to all of you. Have a nice day. Good luck.